Hello, everyone. I'm here today with Tracy Sainsbury, our fertility expert, and we're going to be talking about pathways to parenthood for people who are in same-sex relationships or transgender people. So, Tracy, it's lovely to see you again.
And you too. Thanks for inviting me back for a chat.
Well, it's time that we kind of spoke into this, and I know there have been some recent updates and some changes. So, I just wonder if you could just kick off and start talking us through how does the fertility journey work? What are the options for people who are in same-sex relationships or transgender?
Well, if we start with transgender, who may or may not be in a same-sex relationship, but
Yeah.
I'm starting with transgender just because it is more and more routine. I'm based in Wales, so a huge proportion of the clients that I see for counselling are actually being invited to freeze gametes ahead of their starting T if they're egg freezing. Again, it's that they look at the bigger picture. They may not be anywhere near ready to think about fertility. So people are thinking about it, planning for it, out of sync with when they're ready to think about becoming a family, and often have much more stuff going on. But they'll be invited to freeze, whether it's eggs or sperm. And that in itself can be really difficult. So a lot of my clients who are invited to store sperm don't masturbate. And the thought of actually having to produce a sample in a clinic can be really distressing. And actually, the thought of it can put people off.
Yeah. Well, it's going to activate potentially some gender dysphoria, isn't it?
Totally.
Yeah.
Lots and lots of shame as well, confusion, more so when there's pressure from parents.
Mm.
And I don't know how it is in England because I've been in Wales for quite a while now, but especially with my younger clients who are transitioning, it is often the parents who are pushing for gametes to be frozen. If there is any uncertainty, that familial pressure. So having counselling gives that safe space to acknowledge you don't have to store gametes, but also as a space, as a reminder that there is no guarantees if treatment will be successful from gametes that have been frozen, but also awareness that there are no guarantees about the impact of their fertility plans on their fertility. I work with lots of dads who've given birth. I've been quite privileged. I think I've worked with 3 or 4 now, which is, I feel really honoured and privileged to have been able to support people in that way. And they most often conceived outside of a clinic, again, not comfortable, not how they planned, not how they thought. Some hadn't intended to carry a pregnancy, but for many different reasons went on to carry pregnancy. So until, if you're working with a trans person, unless you know the history and what physical procedures they've been through, don't make judgments or assumptions about what is or isn't possible.
Yeah, exactly. That's so important. I'm really glad you're speaking into that. As psychosexual and relationship specialists in CICS, we're thinking about the impact on sex and relationships all the time, dependent on different circumstances. And for our trans clients, there are multiple different aspects of impact on their sexual and sex and relationship experiences because of their experiences around gender, not all of which are dysphoric, many of them are joyous.
Yeah.
But the gender affirming treatments, whether that's hormonal or surgical, do have a potential influence on decisions around and possibilities around fertility.
Yeah.
And you're quite right. They're often people are being asked to think about this way in advance of ever wanting to think about it, and it's a low priority. And then 5-10 years along the line, it might not be a low priority.
Low priority for them, often not for their parents. It is a bit
Yeah.
odd There
Yeah.
aren't many other counselling situations where the voice of the parents is so loud. It's come as a shock to me because in the UK, in private clinics, I think I'd worked with gamete storage ahead of transitioning once. You know,
Mhm.
I'd worked with lots and lots of same-sex couples, interpartner, surrogacy, egg donation, sperm donation, the whole shebang. You come and work at the NHS in Wales and there's 3 a week. So it's an awful lot. And the voice of the parents about making sure that they know their options are there for them in the future, it feels protective, it feels caring, but it also feels I might want a genetic grandchild.
Exactly that. That's just that. We're thinking about pathways to parenting in our conversation, and what you're bringing in is the expanded perspective of pathways to grandparenting,
Oh, totally.
right? And I wonder how that hits the individual on their sense of being accepted in their gender identity. You know, it feels like a bit of a caveat to the acceptance of the gender identity from the parents to the child, the adult child that you're
I'm
working
sat here smiling because I have physically told one mum, and it feels possibly counselling perspective totally inappropriate, but because they asked for an additional session for mum to be present as well, and the clinic approved, because she's so supportive, I was very honest and said it feels quite passive aggressive that just how present your needs are when we're actually focusing on um, their child, who, although an adult, it felt parent child rather than anywhere near acknowledging their adulthood. So again, there are multiple layers of things to think about, but it comes down to asking clients, what are your hopes, dreams, and fantasies?
yes, yeah,
And again, thinking about the parent's voice, and this is relevant because a lot of my trans men who have stored eggs and have a female partner, the female partner can often be quite keen to use her eggs,
mm-hmm.
and that can be really confusing and really difficult for the man's parents,
Mm.
mum especially. Just thinking from clients I've worked with recently. So again, it's listening and providing that safe, supportive place to acknowledge how they're going to manage the grief of others at such a joyous time when they're planning on moving forwards to have their family, and what the big picture family looks like, because a lot of clients want to have that genetic connection within the child, and there can be a thought, well, we'll use the same sperm donor, but if there's quite a difference between both parents, then that kind of doesn't make sense. There can be an awful lot of expectation that you will have the same donor, and actually neutralizing that to say you can quite happy have a narrative that, you know, this was our pathway to parenthood and we picked a donor who was opposite for each of the eggs that we used. So again, it's that claiming each step of the journey, acknowledging the narrative and the narrative you want to share with a little person in the future. You know, donors donate to enable parents to parent, and what's our fantasy family look like, and what do we need to do to make that happen?
Thank you so much. There's just such a lot of richness there. And it's about peeling back those levels of awareness as the therapist, isn't it? And what we're sitting with. Is
Yeah.
there anything more you wanted to share specifically around experience? I know you could say much, much more, but is there anything in our conversation you wanted to share specifically on pathways to parenthood for trans people at this stage?
When we finished chatting, sadly, I've mentioned to Julia I'd had some problems with electricity following a storm, so I'd hope to do a big in-depth resource list for you. I will get that and have that over. Jacob the Seahorse is one of the most inspirational dads who's given birth, who's on Instagram, and he runs an organisation called Transparent Change. and his links and resources and sharings online are always rich and useful and informative. And I think it's those little nuggets and gems. If you don't know the information, know where to look. And anybody is always welcome to drop me an email and ask specifics. That's always been there. You know, medicine is changing all the time. We're updating the Human Fertilization and Embryology Act. When you're working with clients, especially when they're planning that fertility journey and exploring options, what often people don't think about is what to do when you're at the end of your fertility journey. So especially for my trans clients who've reached the point of their family being complete, whether they've used all of their gametes that were stored or not, they can be stored now for up to 55 years. So it's a heck of a long time, but we don't know how much funding there will be there for treatment or whether people will have to self-fund. So for clients knowing you can move egg, sperm, embryos all around the world, you know, again, you're not stuck in the clinic that gametes were frozen. Speak to people, find the networks, find out which clinics have been more supportive or are accepting, embracing, empathetic. You know, again, it's about seeing what's happening at the time when you're working with clients, because having this conversation now, it might be 3 or 4 years down the line and things might again be quite different. So again, reach out and ask at the time if you need them, but know that support's there for you as professionals as well as for people on a journey.
Brilliant. Thank you. Right. So shall we talk a little more now about pathways to parenthood for people in same-sex relationships?
Yeah. My same-sex clients, oh my goodness, are harder on themselves tenfold than any heterosexual couple. Heterosexual couples give themselves permission to be pissed off, angry, and upset that they couldn't conceive through beautiful romantic lovemaking or rubbish sex with the right person. And
you describe that. Yeah.
well, they will have thought about it. You've met your person, you've fallen head over heels in love. And then if it's a male couple, whose sperm are we going to use? How's it going to work? Can we do eggs and inseminate them both and then put both in? So we don't know, which is often an ideal but not legal in the UK. So there's all kinds of things that are possible or not. For my female couples, shall we go into a clinic? Shall we find a known donor outside? Shall we use one of the many donor matching services online and have somebody turn up with a sample at home, which is growing in popularity because treatment's so expensive. So if we take it back to basics, for female couples, who's going to carry the pregnancy? Whose eggs are we using? Because they don't have to be the same. A shared motherhood journey used to be called intra-partner egg donation. Thankfully, now there's not the same screening that there is for donors. And it is knowing what's going on with your fertility. If you've got a plan as to who wants to do what, and you go into a clinic and you'll have a fertility MOT. It's not about cars, it's about wanting to be a mother of tomorrow. And they'll do an anti-Malarian hormone test to look at ovarian reserve and an internal scan to look at the size and location of the ovaries and if there are any contraindications to a pregnancy within the uterus. So they're giving that physical overview and being able to advise about what treatments would be possible, whether it's insemination, if the person who wants to carry wants to use their eggs as well, or whether it's more intense with an IVF cycle where shared motherhood would be possible. A lot of my women who are embracing parenthood will also at some point, often if depending on age and fertility and health, might consider egg sharing as part of the process that can significantly reduce the cost. And I'm mentioning cost because it's important. Costs of fertility treatment, you know, it's grossly unfair. And your unconscious can be shouting, we shouldn't put a price on a baby, but fertility treatment is expensive. NHS treatment is often available, but you have to have self-funded 6 cycles of insemination before you're able to access treatment. Some workplaces now include fertility coverage within their policies, both male couples embracing egg donation and surrogacy. Across the board, there's an inclusivity where fertility coverage is included. So I always say to couples, check out what's available. I've worked with couples who've come in to look at their fertility a few years ahead, who've actually navigated career pathways to find organisations to work where there is fertility coverage, even if it's on a temporary contract, because often the coverage is included if it's a temporary post. So again, understand the journey of your clients, because the costs are relevant. I think 7,000 to 8,000 is the average cost for IVF with sperm donation at the moment, up to 10 or 11 with initial tests and additional screening tests. So it's not small amounts of money. It's money that often people are borrowing money from friends or family, as I said, coming up with this real plan to make it happen. When people conceive outside of a clinic, it's really important that they look at the legal framework. Now, if a couple is married or in a civil partnership, then they are legal parents of any child conceived, irrespective of how the child is conceived. If they aren't in a committed legal relationship, then the person provided the sperm can be identified as the second legal parent. So again, it's really important. Check on the websites. Pride Angel is one of the organisations that have more information, not just an ability to find a known donor, but also more information about the legal framework. Natalie Gamble is a fertility lawyer and has a big knowledge base on her website where there's lots of information about known donation and conceiving outside of a clinic. Where you have clients who are conceiving with a known donor outside of a clinic, I'd still always advise them to have implications counselling with a specialist fertility counsellor. We don't interrupt the rest of your relationship counselling. It's quite themed sessions where we have specific topics that we explore around their pathway to parenthood, hopes, dreams and fantasies for the future, for the parents, for the donor and his partner if he has one, and then a group one all together. The biggest problem in known donation, actually, whether it's in a clinic or outside, is where there's unmet expectations or assumptions have been made. So checking out with your clients what the assumptions are, hopes, dreams, fantasies around what parenthood will look like after, what role a known donor will play. As I said, I advise them as a group to go off and have implications counselling so that you can support your clients moving through. Or if you have a client who's a known donor, again, it's advised that they have that additional support in place. If they're coming through a clinic, then the initial screening tests often give weight to who's going to carry a pregnancy and whose eggs are going to be used. When they're embracing donor conception, again, it is about thinking of we always say, think of a big family photo so that they can pick a donor that wouldn't be outstanding within the big family photo. But there's little steps that can trigger sadness, grief, loss around not having a baby that's genetically from both of them when you found your person. So again, it's that, how is it for your client, and unpick those layers as they move forwards.
Thank you for that. I guess I've noticed my mind going to wanting to know a little bit more about the detail of shared motherhood and what that actually means in the technology of it, as in the detail of it. What does that mean?
Where the ovaries of the non-carrying mum are stimulated and the eggs are collected. The eggs collected are fertilised with the sperm from the donor. Now, routinely, we grow embryos onto day 5 or 6, sometimes now day 7. And in some clinics, they'll prepare the partner who's carrying the pregnancy will be in treatment alongside, focuses on preparation of the uterus ahead of embryo transfer. Sometimes they'll freeze the embryos so that they can get to that stage and then focus on preparing the uterus of the carrying mum. Because there is no other mother when you're doing a shared motherhood journey. You are both, one of you is genetic, one of you is epigenetic from the environmental factors of the pregnancy influencing the way the genes express themselves and the physical act of carrying. So again, trying to unpick the grief and loss and sadness that they can't just have sex and have a baby.
All right. So, I mean, it's wonderful, isn't it, that there are pathways to parenthood that are far more considered now than they were when 20 years ago when I was going through this process. What about, sorry,
I was just going to say, for my male couples,
yes,
different countries have different regulatory frameworks that can add so many more complexities. So, for example, in America, if you're going for egg donation and surrogacy, you can pick the gender of the embryos used to transfer. We're not allowed to do gender selection in the UK. You can put embryos created from both of you in, no problem. In the UK, where we have absolute traceability, it's as much for donors as it is for parents. So donors can find out the gender and year of birth of any child born with assistance from eggs or sperm donated. So every treatment cycle can only include the gametes from one person connected to the eggs and one person connected to the sperm, so that donors can access gender and year of birth of child born with assistance from gametes donated. But also parents are also able to access information, gender and year of birth of other children conceived with assistance from the same donor. In America, there isn't that regulatory framework. So if two dads want to transfer two embryos and just welcome a little person, that can be great. However, if a child asks a question, home DNA kits are 40 quid now.
yes.
So it's almost, you're trying to promote equality, but a child might want information. So again, it's let's take things back to think of the questions that a child might ask in the future, which is what we do with the UK regulatory framework.
Right, got you. Well, so what are the choices then for male male partners progressing their family?
I used to work a lot with different surrogacy organisations, and sadly, the war in Ukraine made a huge difference because a lot of my clients went to the Ukraine for surrogacy. But the surrogates in Ukraine just wanted to be pregnant to help people have a family. There were many, many beautiful stories of families created through surrogacy in Ukraine, and it's sad that it's not safe for that to come back. My hope is it will be at some point. Mexico is opening up as a destination. There is more surrogacy in Canada, in the US. Surrogacy has been more talked about in the UK, and sadly, the waiting list for intended parents is growing and growing and growing, but there aren't as many surrogates. So it's complex and complicated and expensive, 60, 70, 100,000 for surrogacy, for egg donation and surrogacy isn't unheard of at all. It can be 15, 20, 25,000. It can be less if a couple is able to find a surrogate who is known to them. I've got a lovely male couple who's one of their mums was the surrogate. They found an egg donor. Sister was going to be an egg donor, and it just felt all way too complicated, and they decided no, we'll find an egg donor, and mum-in-law of the other one carried the pregnancy. So again, it is that there are multiple hoops that a surrogate has to jump through for her screening tests. There are multiple hoops that an egg donor has to jump through, and decisions to be made around the sperm. So when people are choosing an egg donor, again, it might be a known egg donor or through one of the egg donation organisations, might be an egg donor donating straight to a clinic. But routinely now you purchase frozen eggs in batches of 4 or 8 or 12, and then most often my male couples will fertilise half each and then be dictated by which embryo is used initially by the quality of the embryos. So with male journeys, we say slow things down. Let's see where the hopes and dreams and fantasies are, see the quality of the sperm from the initial semen analysis, and then begin to work forwards. Again, it's about unpicking the layers. There can be a lot of grief and a lot of lack of control there. Where it can go wrong, surrogacy is expensive. And often surrogates form great relationships with their intended parents. They feel very close, very connected. And when you can see through a clinic, you have that extra layer of legal support from all of your forms. When people try and do surrogacy outside of a clinic, oh, this has been so difficult, use my eggs, let's just do it. I'm going to be your surrogate anyway. We've done all the screening, done all the checks. Then it can become more difficult because she is growing a baby with her eggs. Now, that is a lot less common than it used to be. It used to be always a surrogate's own eggs. But certainly in the last 10, 15 years, most often it's egg donation and the surrogate not growing a baby that's genetically connected to her. You know, there is such a strong desire and readiness to be parents. Again, that can be a loss.
Absolutely. I know with my work with some men, some gay men, they have a desire that they describe as being a mother. They want to be a mother.
Yeah.
It's a physiological desire to grow a baby, and it's not the same as being gender dysphoric and identifying as a woman. It's different.
Yeah.
There's some nuances that cross over, but there's that fundamental desire to have a baby, to really have a baby. That's been described to me as mothering, not fathering.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think we live in such a pronatal society where people are valued more by whether or not they have a child, and we don't become as aware of it until you're proactively ready to try and conceive or certainly move forward with that journey. One of the biggest problems that can be difficult for my couples embracing surrogacy is the waiting. It can be quite quick. Get your embryos ready and then you're ready to be matched with a surrogate. And you're kind of prepared that it might be a year, it might be 18 months, it might be 2 years. But anybody who you've told about your journey can be saying, so what's happening next? Oh, so what's happening next? So when are you going to be expecting? When can we welcome a baby? And it's because people love you and care for you and they want you to be parents. But again, for your job as a therapist is to acknowledge the pressure, the sadness that is triggered constantly. You know, it can feel punishing and persecutory when people around you are getting pregnant. So again, it's that hold on to what's not said and really nurture and be aware of that need for a safe space. Because it can feel quite medicalized and clinical, and often it's the emotional stuff that's just exhausting.
Oh, yeah. I remember that from my own experience, and didn't have some of these extra dimensions on it. So I guess it's important for us to speak a little bit about the changes with HIV status that have been recently communicated. Would you like to tell us something about that?
Yeah, it's fantastic. Ordinarily, we're a known donor or co-parent. I work an awful lot with co-parents as well, where people aren't in an intimate relationship but are both planning to be legal parents of any child conceived. HIV used to be not acceptable for a donor or a co-parent. It would exclude you. But where viral load is not present, then that is now deemed okay, which is, makes such a huge decision, because people used to be so happy to try and conceive outside of a clinic but wanted the extra bit of paper for the regulatory framework, and that also applies for surrogacy as well. So again, it just means fairer access and equality to treatment. On a similar level, also where female couples are having a shared motherhood journey, they are no longer screened as a donor either. So again, that makes things so much easier. There is a promotion of transparency and awareness of medical health, just when we're speaking to groups of people or couples about what's going on. But again, it just makes everything that bit fairer.
So I was really pleased to hear about that. Because I know that's come up in our training spaces a lot as a real sense of an unfair prohibition.
Oh, absolutely.
Now we have you equals you, and that's
Where we've updated the surrogacy regulatory framework, there was a real hope that there would no longer be a need for a genetic connection in order for surrogacy to move forward. But sadly, very much there was an overriding view that that would be adoption. There has to be a connection, a genetic connection to one of the parents in order for the surrogacy process to go through. So that was tested and discussed a lot.
yeah, I can only imagine. No, that's really valuable, and that brings us to that point as well of adoption. Of course, that is a pathway to parenthood for people of all identities and combinations of relationship, and comes with its own challenges, of course.
And further complicated because for some adoption agencies, there is a need to have ended a fertility journey completely before you embrace adoption. Now, that ordinarily means 12 months after your last fertility treatment cycle. But if you're a trans person who froze gametes and you're moving forwards with adoption, you might not be ready to let them go because there is no future option to undo that. So I acknowledge just how triggering and re-traumatizing it can be if there are gametes or indeed embryos frozen.
Right, there's such a lot to think about there. What are the other bars or kind of perceived hurdles for LGBT people for adoption that come to mind?
Certainly not recently for adoption. I think the hurdle with adoption is there is a growing recognition of the impact of long-term trauma, including trauma in the uterus.
Yes.
So where there is, if we acknowledge pregnancy hardwires us for life, if there's trauma from in the womb, we used to see adoptions disrupt with the judgment of parents that it was down to poor parenting of an adopted child. But if pregnancy was chaotic, adult levels of stress hormones can mean actually a family setting isn't the right one. So I think the rewriting of what adoption looks like in modern society, where children placed have often experienced traumatic pregnancy and early beginnings, means you can be waiting a long time for a match. And an awful lot of my clients who come back in for donor conception have stopped treatment, gone off to pursue adoption, and have come back. So I work with a lot of a huge increase in numbers of female couples who are embracing egg donation and donor and sperm donation or embryo donation, which is certainly growing in popularity at the moment as more people are talking about embryos being left in store for fear of making a decision.
Yeah. And I mean, you've shared with us in your other resources for us on the course just how complex all of this is, and I think that fundamental desire that people feel to be parents can override the that kind of conscious analysis of all of the pros and cons. Understandably, this is not a logical process that people are experiencing. And I guess it can sometimes put the therapist in the position of, do I need to kind of raise these implications? Do I need to, invite or offer implications therapy, or is it my place to interrupt this, this dream and this drive with the complex questions of consequences and concerns? And this is in the frame of anyone going into a parenting process with some assistance.
Most fertility clinics will want implications counselling to be completed by a BICA, British Infertility Counselling Association accredited counsellor. So there is a set framework for implications counselling. So
so it's best for our students, unless that is their specialism already,
Yeah.
and they're qualified already in that, to refer out or ensure that that's been considered by the clients. Can clients opt out of implications?
There's a thought that when they update the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Act that informs practice, that it will be mandatory. At the minute, it's mandatory that it's offered, but many clinics have a mandatory attendance. Again, I'll give an example. If I'm working with somebody who's in therapy, but they've come for implications counselling, the resources that I share post our treatment are routinely quite practical about the regulatory framework and what information can be accessed at what point in time by who. And the resources from we look at sensory processing because of hypervigilance during a hopefully life-creating situation where you've got no control. But I always say, you know, an acceptance and commitment therapeutic resources because of the lack of control that we have in embracing the highs and lows of treatment. So I will write a resource letter to my clients after our session, and I will say, share it with your therapist, because I don't want anything that I've suggested to impact on your work. So it's very much I see my client's therapist as holding them during their treatment, and I've just filled in some practical fertility gaps to make sure they're aware that this roller coaster is real, and they're not. If somebody's having CBT, it can be difficult, because if you're trying to challenge overwhelming thoughts and feelings, actually you're going to have lots of them. So you know, bring them on and respond with compassion sits much better. But again, it is that go back to basics and provide that safe, holding, nurturing place for your clients. But if anybody has any practical questions about fertility treatment, drop me an email. You know, I'm accessible and I routinely answer within 24 hours. You don't have to wait for it.
So generous. I really appreciate that.
No, you're welcome.
Appreciate our collaboration and your support for our courses and our students. And I just thank you so much for your time, Tracy.
You're very welcome. As I said, any questions, anytime, reach out, because things change. Not changing quick enough. If we could conceive from a cell, it would be so much better for same-sex couples and trans people, rather than having to store all these gametes and go through treatment. But again, reach out, get in touch. No, I've got you back.
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much.
No, you're very welcome. Take care.